Welcome to The Herd on West Exec, the podcast that discusses everything you need to know about working in the executive branch of the federal government. Hello, I'm Irv Dennis, board member and CFO at the American Cornerstone Institute. I served in the executive branch in the Trump administration as a CFO at HUD under Secretary Carson. This podcast is part of ACI's program called the Executive Branch for America, which is designed to educate what it's like to work in the executive branch. Today's topic, we're going to discuss the inner workings of the Department of Homeland Security, and we are so fortunate to be joined by Troy Edgar, former Chief Financial Officer of DHS. Welcome, and so glad that you're able to join us today, and I know the audience is going to get a lot out of this conversation.
Thank you.
And before we get into DHS, you've got a very diverse background,
Sure.
Very similar to mine, and I got a lot of private sector experience, as do you, but you also have a lot of government experience.
Sure.
So you've got the unique perspective on both sides. So I'm anxious to hear a little bit about that. So maybe just start with a little bit of your background and
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you found your way into DHS.
Well, first of all, Irv, so good seeing you again. Yeah, it's we've had great opportunity to work together over the last couple of years. So I really appreciate being on the show. Thank you. So my background is really diverse. So pretty significant public sector and private. So U.S. Navy veteran at the very beginning. And
well, thank you for your service.
No,
I had not known that until I read your bio this week.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I, so it's kind of starting off then, got out of the service, ended up having an opportunity working at McDonnell Douglas, got involved really in manufacturing. I had been a submariner in the Navy, understood, being out there in the fleet, what it was like to have information or different types of things that you really depend on from manufacturers and industry, got out. Spent about 9 years at McDonnell Douglas and Boeing, did the Boeing merger when we ended up getting bought by Boeing, and kind of switched my background a little bit there. I started out as in manufacturing MRP planning for manufacturing and moved my way into the logistics business out of the plant, and then really supporting military aircraft out in the field through spares, support equipment, technical publications, provisioning, all of that, and then about 3/4 of the way of my career got involved with a major audit, something you're familiar with from your days at EY. We had a material accounting problem. They asked for volunteers. No one stood up. I ended up volunteering and got a great opportunity to work with the CFO. And from that, I ended up being the guy that understood how a plant works, understood how logistics work, how to follow stuff into systems, the parts, and when they come through inventory and out into the working process, and ended up being the CFO for that business by the time I left. When I left, at that point, I had finished my MBA, wanted to see different industries, had an opportunity to go to work at Pricewaterhouse, and went in and led their supply chain business and got really involved there. And I spent about 5 years there. And then as I was getting ready to leave, IBM bought, if you remember Sarbanes-Oxley back in the day, separate the audit and the tax. So, I said, IBM started eyeing PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I said, I'll never work at IBM. So I ended up leaving, and I started my own firm. And at that time, management consulting, we were doing a lot of work with Fortune 500 companies, really restructuring for shared services and the consolidations for operations and commissioner restructuring for taxes overseas. And so pretty soon I had a firm of 100 people, and it was off to the races. A lot of people that wanted to stay in the big five, we kind of positioned ourselves as a firm that really stayed with that mantra of true management consulting. Ended up doing that up till the time I ended up serving with yourself, with President Trump and the administration. But in parallel, I really wanted to give back. And so got involved. Our city was on the verge of going bankrupt. Somebody said, Troy, maybe you could help. I ran for city council, and then I ended up being the city council mayor for 12 years. And, so the week I would be flying all over the world, and then a couple of Mondays a month, I'd be in town for the meetings, conducting it as the mayor. Right. And then, really was blessed. And through that, my wife and I got super involved with philanthropy and some of the stuff going on there. So, a great opportunity to serve up. And then,
so how'd you find yourself in DHS? I mean, you certainly got a public service background, and it's part of your DNA, obviously. But how'd you find yourself at DHS?
You know what? I was a mayor of a California city. I got involved with something in California. It was pretty big, and I had an opportunity to meet President Trump. And in that meeting, we were meeting for something else, and he had himself Secretary Nielsen at the time for DHS and the Attorney General, and they were, we were talking about some things, and I got ready to leave, and they had like a dossier on me, and I guess they just don't let anybody up next to the president. And he's like, "Hey, you've got a business background. What are you doing in city politics?" And he goes, "If you wouldn't mind, maybe talk with Kirsten Nielsen." And so I had an opportunity, and next thing you know, they had an opportunity to come. And really, what DHS was looking for at the time is, they had a lot of people running policy, the big picture policy for border enforcement and all that, but the management function of really running the business of DHS was something that they needed help on. They had two big Coast Guard programs that were in the middle of being very distressed, the offshore patrol cutter, and sustainability issues, and then financial systems modernization, which you and I totally, and that's where we hit it off when I came in.
Well, the president's management agenda at that time, he was very focused on IT modernization and bringing in business minds and business experience. And you don't see a whole lot of that inside of government. So it was, you probably felt like I myself, a little bit alone in some of those conversations, especially when you're dealing with OMB and Congress. They don't think of the business side of government. They think of policy and mission, but not so much of how the infrastructure can support that. So I really appreciated his management agenda as it related to bringing that discipline into the government. Tell us a little bit about DHS and its mission. I know it's a large agency. It can be controversial. Obviously, it's political. We did a session the other day with some folks from the NSA, which is not necessarily politically charged.
Right.
And DHS is a little bit different. So tell us a little bit about its mission, and then we'll get into some of the complexities of it.
No, not a problem. So DHS, first and foremost, like people that are here in the Beltway, they know DHS, but really outside, a lot of people don't really realize the far reaches of DHS. Formed in 2002 after 9/11. There was a significant need to pull a lot of national security for really the U.S. national security together. And so it's a organization of about 280,000 people, has a $90 billion budget, and it's 23 components that build up DHS. So just like when you were at HUD, as a headquarters, think of 23 components under that all kind of roll up. And the big ones that people think about are the operational ones like Coast Guard, U.S. Secret Service, ICE, CBP, CISA, USCIS. So you kind of look at all those and TSA, and you just see all the different missions, and you realize the scope of really and the significant amount of responsibility that's out there for that organization.
How do they govern themselves inside of DHS? I mean, it's like you say, there are multiple, basically very different businesses with one mission, I guess, to the safety of the country. But how does that, from a CFO, that's a lot to oversee. Does each group have its own CFO and management structure? And how's the governance of that work?
It's tricky. So, if I really kind of stayed with the 9 main operational organizations, each one of those have CFOs, really significant budgets in the billions. And then probably the rest of them, there's about 14 CFOs that report in. But those CFOs have a direct relationship with their commissioner or their component lead. And then from a governance perspective, I think the hard part about DHS is, by definition, by role, by the CFO Act, if you're familiar, it reports, as a dotted line to the secretary and to undersecretary of management. And then basically the primary role in being able to coordinate is to make sure that we have one voice to the public. And it's tough when you've got 9 CFOs, and I served with Chad Wolf. When as what we both kind of learned, I was a business guy and a military guy, so like chain of command and really kind of having an order of being able to go through the sequence. But what you find is some of the components act like they're their own thing, and so you have very strong and forceful personalities that are needed to carry out the mission. And so a lot of times it was a decentralized power structure. The beautiful thing I think about being the CFO for DHS and potentially looking at the way it's supposed to be organized is that all of those voices are really strong in the components, but when it comes to having the heft to be able to deal directly with OMB and get above the fray and deal with, and then through OMB, the White House, to be able to have the ear of the secretary and the deputy. There's 1,000 things going on, but my role, and this is the part that I really enjoyed, was you would get to sort from the little rocks to the big ones. And that is a lot of discretion. So when you would be dealing with the House and the Senate on appropriations, we really needed to make sure that we had one voice. And, the DHS CFO voice would trump the other voices because we represented the view of possibly where the secretary and the president was at that time. And so it was really well organized from a governance perspective, but it was very, a lot of it had to do with the structure in place. It ran a little bit like a military operation too.
So what was your primary responsibilities or day-to-day operations with that? It's a little bit unique than the private sector. With the private sector, you've got generally long-term strategies and you can make decisions quicker, you can execute on decisions quicker. Government, I found that to be a little bit different, a little bit more complex. Everything's a little bit slower. So you've got this short period to execute. Like, how did you approach that? Did you have some targeted things you wanted to get done? And I'm sure there's some things you didn't get done. And for me, I wanted another 4 years to continue what we were doing. So what was your primary responsibility or your day-to-day execution of that?
Well, I felt my primary responsibility is to properly resource policy. So at the highest level, I tried to stay focused on the ball. It was easy to get sucked into 1,000 different things, but that was first and foremost. And, being able, the one thing that I did, like the CFO structure itself, has 10 direct reports, and then you have 14 CFOs. So what we would do was, there's things that the organization wanted to accomplish, and I'll call the organization the career folks. And then I had an agenda being, a proxy of the administration of what we wanted to accomplish, and not me privately, but the people elected the president. The president had priorities, and that was my job. And so, but what I did early on, Irv, is being a consulting guy that comes in to Fortune 500 companies and does restructuring, and you're never like the liked guy when you come in the door at the beginning. You learn to have bedside manner, to build relationships, and to be able to work in the thing. I found career folks, from my own personal experience, a great experience. I hear a lot of stuff in the press, but I just thought they were super professional. And when you meet them where they're at, I was able to have discussions. And so what I did specifically is I said, I gave each of the direct reports a half-hour slot. And I said, this will allow me for us to judge each other, but if you come prepared, maximize your half hour. I'm going to tell you the 2 or 3 things that I want to get done in the next year and what I hope to do over 4 years if we're blessed to be here. And I want to know what you're getting compensated to hit for your goals. And I bet you a lot of them are aligned. And then what we'll do is we'll go through and we'll just conclude, like, what are we trying to achieve together? And the ones that you don't necessarily, you're totally in your goal path right now, let's agree those are mine, and then let's be selective, because I can't finish everything. I can't start a bunch of fights and not win any of them. And then and that got us all going the same path, because I also wanted to see these career people who are dedicated public servants be successful in their career. And I think that contrition and that level of understanding and empathy with trying to meet them where they're at, I got 10x out of what I would normally got if I was more combative.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I have wished, and I write about this in my book, I wish the public knew how mission-driven and hard-working the career folks are inside of government. There's a lot of smart people. They're there for the mission more than the economics of it. And it's refreshing to see. The press doesn't cover it, but I wish there was more visibility to that. One thing I found when my experience inside the executive branch was how much interaction there is with the private sector, and how much each relies on each other to accomplish what they want to accomplish. NASA was a great example. I mean, a big part of their budget goes out to the private sector for developing new technology and space exploration, et cetera. DHS, I assume they have a lot of private partnership experiences, and can you spend a few minutes on that?
Yeah, sure. No, I love to. Being a guy from industry and being in there, it was interesting to watch. there's a couple different market pressures when you talk about involvement with industry. When it comes to the DHS needing to find vendors to support the mission, I would throw that into procurement, into that realm. Yes. So within DHS, if you look at the way it's structured, under the secretary, they have the undersecretary, and their chain of command, at the highest level through the Vacancy Act goes, secretary, deputy, and then undersecretary of management, which there wasn't one while I was there. But in that group is the chief procurement officer. And, at that point, Soraya Correa was somebody that was in there. Now Paul Courtney, he was, they basically had a great relationship with industry. And what I thought was helpful is they really facilitated a process to have industry days. They would have hard stuff. We had a significantly hard time on the offshore patrol cutter. We the contract for a lot of different reasons, and for your viewers, if they're interested, go research it. But the bottom line is they kind of had to recompete it after the first lot, and to do that they had to let industry in. And so I think that the thing I liked about DHS, they're not afraid to interact with agency. Right. And some of them, I'm at IBM as an executive, and I serve as not only the national security portfolio, but DOD, FedCiv, and it's interesting that some agencies are cautious to have industry come in unless it's a very controlled process because they don't want to have an OCI or a conflict of interest problems down the road for requirements. So,
how did you, dealing with the private sector? I found it fascinating working with OMB, the White House, and Congress, and the complexity of those relationships was an education for me. How did you find that? And anything you need to do in government, you need support from OMB, you need support from the Hill, and that's a little bit different than the private sector as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like outside of what you and I do day to day. Looking at what would a next administration do, and I try to reflect on that. It's like a couple things that come to mind is number one. Looking at not to be the CFO, but looking at it from a CFO perspective is, I think, the most important job to get policies funded and resourced is the budget director job. Yeah. So the budget director really controls by proxy, and they're very technically oriented, the ability for you to explain what your situation is, and for them to have informal discussions with staffers on the appropriations and with the evaluators in OMB. And the thing that was so the first thing is like establish a good relationship, even if they don't have confirmed CFOs the first a year or two. Make sure that relationship is there. The second thing is, I think at DHS we had a little bit of a confusing structure in place that it's not confusing. I don't think we just ever embraced it and then tried to acknowledge this. We have a legislative affairs group that deals with the approvers, or the authorizers, the ones that are Homeland's Government Affairs and Committee. And then we have the appropriators. Well, the CFO shop would deal with the appropriators, and the ledge shop dealt with the approvers or the authorizers. And so sometimes the voice to Congress wasn't congruent. Right. And so the secretary and us, we would all try to work together and really try to improve that. So I think the other part is to try to have a consistent legislative voice, especially in controversial areas like DHS, because people are looking for gaps. Yep. They want to kind of see where we're not consistent. Probably the last thing was OMB. It was interesting as trying to carry out president's agenda, you would run into OMB, and I could have the greatest ideas. The secretary's like, go do these things. The components are like, Troy, I'm totally with you. And then I'd go meet with the OMB evaluators and their career people. Yeah. And they're like, Troy, your stuff is not good. Yeah. And it's like, well, wait, you're OMB. And they're like, no, you don't have measures for this. And and as a business person, like when they're telling me that, they're absolutely right. Because GIPRA, some of the different types of measures that are required based, in finance and operationally don't port over to helping you substantiate in a congressional budget justification. So it's like I was getting beat up by OMB. I'm a business guy enough to know that's probably valid, but they're getting in the way of the agenda. Right. And it just seemed like it took a lot to get to the political part of OMB. Right. And when eventually on one issue with the Coast Guard, I got to deal with Russ Vaught, who was our OMB director. he was unbelievable. But I was like, God, I wish there was like that consistency. And the people that I dealt with were awesome. Like no critical point on, or no negativity on the evaluating folks. But it was, there had to be some concessions if we wanted to get policy done. We needed to kind of meet me halfway, but I didn't know if I had the time to build a relationship and enough time to be successful sometimes. That was probably my big concern.
But did you ever have to testify?
Very few, mainly getting the secretary ready was my job, the backbench.
Which is, that's quite a process, right? I mean, as soon as when the House and Congress lost control, the investigations start, then 40% of your time goes into investigation, which I found very counterproductive. It prevents you from doing what you're trying to accomplish in many ways. But I found that a very educational process too. The amount of time and energy that goes and gets the secretary ready for a hearing is just is again not productive to the business minds that we have.
I think the harder part was once you would get done with the testimony and get everything, you would be driving back to headquarters and you think, God, okay, that went okay. It didn't seem like we took on too much water. And then by the time you got back, the QFRs, or the questions for the record, would show them. It's like, wow. They're like two. So it's like they saved the good stuff to put it in writing for us. And it was usually that type of stuff that took a long time after the hearings to try to reconcile.
I really enjoyed the experience, and there was a lot of fun stuff that comes with the job that it wasn't necessarily intuitive when I signed up for it. Do you have any fun stories and really enjoyable stuff it's all enjoyable. I really enjoyed every minute of it, but there's some really unexpected fun stuff you get to do.
So then I, being a corporate guy, like I did restructuring for Toyota, done a lot of different Fortune 500 restructuring. And when you come into a business situation, I find that the most effective executives are ones that get out from behind the desk, get out of the office and go into the field and really touch and feel like, what are we really trying to do? Yeah. And I felt like to be a good CFO, to be able to argue for certain things over others, the smart component leads and the smart CFOs would say, hey, Troy, why don't we take you out to show you how this budget would be applied? And so I had an opportunity a couple times to go to the border. The commandant, he was probably the most savvy, let me back up, Admiral Schultz. And he would we would go to see different things. And when I would go to the border in San Diego, the CBP and ICE folks would go, hey, let's give you a tour of the border. And probably the most interesting thing happened is with CBP and ICE, HSI, and they took me to go explore the tunnels on the border.
Oh, wow.
And when I'm out there, I didn't have a suit on, but I was kind of dressed for the field, and we pull up to this area in the middle of the wall. Yeah. And they had hard hat and all this stuff, and I'm like, what are we doing there? Like, we're going to go in the tunnel. And so I kind of rappelled down about 20 feet down, and then went up into the tunnels, some of these underground tunnels that they had kind of captured and kind of sealed off. But when you come up, you could see buildings in Mexico, and these tunnels went for a quarter of a mile under and came up into the inside of a manufacturing facility.
Interesting.
And that's how they smuggled stuff into the country. And so there's a couple pictures of me out there, if anybody looks, of looking like I'm scared out of my mind because I'm 20 feet underground in a tunnel. But that was pretty fun.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. It's and again, there's an example of the public doesn't know all the resources that we do to keep our country safe, and there's a great example. One thing I found about working in the executive branch is it's a phenomenal networking avenue, and it helps build a resume in so many different ways. And I spent close to 40 years at EY, and everything I'm doing now is a result of my time in the executive branch. And so what are you doing now, and how did this help whatever you're doing now?
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, I think what's kind of interesting in my story, and it's the ultimate networking story, right? It's like I was doing Fortune 500 restructuring, and as a side job, tried to give back to my community as a mayor job. From the mayor job, ended up meeting the president of the United States, and with one meeting, turned that into this. And so I think you always got to kind of take advantage of the opportunities that are presented and keep an open mind if that's what you want. When I got out of the administration, I had an opportunity to look at what I wanted to do. I still own a bunch of companies outside of when I had to put them in kind of a trust while I was in. But I came out and I talked to my wife. I'm like, what do we want to do? We don't really need to go back to work. And she's like, you'll drive me crazy. So I ended up at IBM. And, the thing that I really like about being at IBM is it's the combination between a tech company and a consultancy. And so that job has allowed me to basically take the knowledge that I gained through the CFO job at DHS and now apply it across government. And through that process, been able to really meet just a tremendous amount of people, and really kind of validating some of my working theories. Some of the career people I've worked with are really good. Also, kind of being here, I also want to give back to potentially the political side. And something that I took from this experience is that we need better people to come in to be politicals. I think a big part of what President Trump did was like, I remember I was at Paramount Studios. They were a client before I came in, and not big fans of President Trump. But they were my clients, and they're great people. And we're having coffee on the lot, and they're like, "How can you go work for that man?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Look, if it was anybody else, they wouldn't be asking for my help." And it's public service, so I'm doing exactly, I've shown it. I've done 12 years of public service. This is no different. I'm just giving at the national level. They need something I have, I'm going to do it. And I think that those types of discussions, when you realize like what a noble cause it is to have the honor to be able to do what we've done, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, you certainly have a public service background, and like I said, it's part of your DNA. You've experienced your whole life, and you've served it your whole life. So thank you for that, and thank you for your time today. I think this has been very valuable, and I hope our audience gets a lot out of it, and really appreciate your time. And hopefully we'll have you back again someday with what your continued adventures are. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, Irv, thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Excellent.
Thank you.
And thank you, audience. Appreciate you joining us today, and hopefully we'll see you on our next podcast.